Welcome to this segment of Citizens Forum, being recorded September 3rd for me, 6:15 in the morning, and for my guest today, it's 9:15 in Ottawa. That I first went across our guest and found out about her when I read one of the reports that she made for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, where she declared or came up with the position that electromagnetic hypersensitivity is an environmental sensitivity, and we should be accommodated for it. And suffering from electromagnetic hypersensitivity, I will agree. The report that she wrote, we'll just bring it up here on the screen. And if someone wants to get a look at a copy of it, it's available online. I checked, it's still available here online.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Meg Sears. She's definitely got some very extensive experience in this area and a great many other areas that she's currently the chair of Prevent Cancer Now, and a little bit of her medical or not her medical, but her professional background. She is a chemical engineer, which you believe you finished the training in McGill University. Am I correct there?
That's correct. I did grad at University of Toronto in chemical engineering and applied chemistry, and then went to McGill for biochemical engineering.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome, Meg, Dr. Sears, and you've got some general comments about what you see as the effects and why we should be concerned about electromagnetic radiation. I'll let you take things from here.
Well, thank you very much for having me today, Norm. This is quite the honor, and I'm really glad that people are still noticing the report from the Rights Commission that led to a policy under the Canadian Human Rights Act that that environmental sensitivities should be accommodated in federal workplaces and so on. So that's quite a large number of places, and it's a substantial recognition, and it's a very important human rights policy that is within the federal jurisdiction. Federal jurisdiction doesn't go everywhere, but for federal workplaces and so on, it does. It's rather interesting because a lot of the work in the report and a lot of attention goes to chemical sensitivities, and rightly so, because they're better understood. And now we realize that there's actually interaction between between the effects of chemicals on the biochemistry of the body and electromagnetic radiation. So, for instance, there's a study of children in Korea, thousands of children, and when they looked at children, we know to start with that in the blood and in the brain of children, decreases IQ and increases attention deficit. So they looked at children's lead levels and their use of cell phones making phone calls, so the radiation would be stronger on the head. And there was no difference between the children with low levels of lead or high levels of lead with low cell phone use, or between low lead and high cell phone use. But the children who had higher lead levels, and these are not particularly high, they're within what we see in Canada as well, but higher within this group. The ones who made more calls on their cell phones, which again were not a lot of calls, and had this higher level of lead, those had significantly greater attention deficit and lower IQ. So it was seen to be, we see in children how this is, these two toxicants interact. And between the two of them makes things worse. We know that chemicals with radiofrequency radiation in cancer, there was a large animal study that was actually done twice, where they found that in animals, giving them a known carcinogen and then giving them the known carcinogen plus radiofrequency radiation, in those two groups, there was a lot more cancer in the ones that had the exposure to both than only the carcinogen. So the policy under the Canadian Human Rights Act is not broadly applicable, but it could be, but it's an indication that there is a need to reduce all of these exposures. And right now, there's a lot of chemical exposures that we could reduce, but the one that is increasing the fastest and would be easiest to reduce is actually electromagnetic radiation, because we're using it in a lot of frivolous ways. And there are safer alternatives that are not only safer from human health and environmental health, they're also lower energy. And we have the red light on about our energy use. So if we can cover off human health, environmental health, and climate change and energy use all in one way, this is a real kind of situation. And we can do that by, instead of focusing on wireless 5G and so on, we can get faster, more secure, more energy, lower energy use for communications by really focusing on using fiber and wires as much as we possibly can.
You know, I'm sure glad to hear you bring that part up, that there's a whole health issues, which unfortunately I'm well aware of personally, but it's nice to hear coming in from the more general science end of just things such as how expensive it is to use in terms of energy, and we can just go down that whole climate change and everything else line.
Yeah, right now we have to do everything we possibly can to reduce our energy use. We can't simply say, oh, well, you know, we'll make electric buses and that will solve the problems of the world. We need every possible opportunity to reduce our chemical use, because there's a big greenhouse gas footprint associated with resource extraction and transport and refining and all this kind of thing. So there's a lot of chemical use that we could easily get rid of. For instance, fragrances that don't make your clothes any cleaner. But I think that if you're going to make changes, you get a huge bang for your buck in changing how we communicate. You can be radically green by using an antenna on your roof for watching TV instead of streaming. And it astounds me that more people aren't doing that. You can listen to things on the radio. You don't have to stream it on your phone. You can get a DVD and watch it on your TV, and trying to watch a movie as you walk down the street. There's a lot of very silly things that are happening these days that people do because they can, but really we'd be better off not to.
Well, I'm just thinking, what type of leadership do you see should the federal government do in, shall we say, more electromagnetic radiation awareness and discouraging people from using it?
That's a really important question. And I wish I had a really good answer, because the federal government, we're seeing, and this is happening around the world, it's not just in Canada. There is a huge industry interaction with the government. There is the lobbying, there's money going back and forth for elections, which we have right now. There's been working on pesticides, and there's a huge push on pesticides to increase the amount that's allowed in our food. And there's a large industry contingent that's pushing that internationally. So we need to have federal leadership that understands science, so they aren't bamboozled by all of these people who come parading through their door, telling them things that they don't really understand, and they don't have the capacity in their background to assess the validity of it. They're being sold a bill of goods, and then they're using our tax dollars to pay for it. So the strong science-based and listening to the scientists is really important. And I think this pandemic should have taught us the importance of that. As a scientist, I was working on a project about COVID in buildings and ventilation and this kind of thing. And I was in touch with all of the scientists, and there was no doubt that this wave in the fall was going to come. And yet there was all this pushback saying, oh, well, you know, we don't have to say that now, and this kind of thing. And like, I'm not interested in your sales pitch on a pandemic. Let's give people the straight goods and as we can learn from what's happening and do the very best science-based interventions and technologies that we can, because not protecting health and the environment is way expensive. People say, oh, we can't shut this down because of the economy. Being sick and having environmental catastrophes are incredibly expensive, way more expensive. We were talking about last spring, I was speaking to New Brunswick about use of glyphosate in forestry and producing these monocultures of very flammable conifers. And people were saying, oh, well, you know, we have to minimize our timber production. Well, you don't get much timber out of something that's burned down. The world has a lot of stability with biodiversity and so on, that we have our false economy ideas of, we have to micromanage and use all these chemicals and so on to take care of our forests. And in the meantime, we've completely undercut the ecology of the forests, and we end up losing because we've created something that burns so easily. And that's just one example. But going back to radio frequency radiation,
I was just going to
we can have fast, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Actually, what I was going to say that is we're coming up to where we have to say goodbye to the viewers on cable, but we can continue this later, or just continue on for the ones that are watching live on Twitter or YouTube. Have you got any last words you really would like to say for our cable viewers?
We have an election going on now, and I think it's important that people ask their candidates to support the recommendations of the Health Committee about radiofrequency radiation. They have been kind of in abeyance for quite a while. They were passed by a conservative government, by a Liberal government. There's really to move ahead on this issue within Health Canada and Environment Canada. So that's one good thing. And the other thing people can ask their candidates about is how the government is going to finance and incentivize and move forward with safe G rather than 5G.
I think that's a good point to end with the cable viewers on, and that Hessian Report you brought up is something that encourages people, the cable viewers, to follow and watch the rest of the interview on the internet.
Yes, they can go to Canadians for Safe Technology. They have a lot of information there. So Thank you very much.
Okay, and you had some comments about the Hessian Report. What did a lot of people probably don't know what that report is? What was it, or is it? I guess
It's the health committee it's a parliamentary health committee. So it's made up of parliamentarians. And so it was in 2015, the Health Canada produced a new Safety Code 6, which are the rules about how, about the limits for exposure to radiofrequency radiation. And it goes across the bands from the very low frequencies that we would see with electricity generation right up through the current radio frequencies that are used for communications and up into higher ones that are planned for 5G. Now, there was a lot of pushback because they were not science-based. There was a lot of very important science that shows that there are biological effects at lowers that are at lower levels that are permitted under Safety Code 6. And so there was a parliamentary hearing under the Conservative government, and then there was an election. So the recommendations of the Health Committee report were not passed forward. But then they went to the following Liberal government brought it back and asked for Health Canada response. And although Health Canada responded, the recommendations have not been acted upon. And there's a whole set of them. There's about a dozen recommendations regarding health and scientific assessment and so on, and then moving ahead to really move to least exposure recommendations rather than saying, oh yeah, everything up to this limit is okay. Really want to be saying as low as possible is what our goals should be. And so that is, those recommendations, these really good recommendations have been sitting there gathering dust for 2-3 governments now. And it's high time for them to be coming back and being acted upon.
I guess that's probably a good question to ask the candidates if they would support reintroducing, once again, the Hessian Report and this time acting on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what the Canadians for Safe Technology is all about, is to bring attention back to these. Because after all, it was accepted by 2 governments, a Liberal one and a Conservative one. It was prepared under the Conservative government, and then it was brought back by the Liberals. So it really has all government support, but total inaction on the part of Health Canada. In fact, now we see that Health Canada's messaging is getting even more liberal, and not politically liberal, but in terms of how they are downplaying possible health effects of radiofrequency radiation on their website. They have pictures of families in the living room with the children all playing with wireless toys, and it's really quite alarming how Health Canada is pushing wireless.
Well, just sort of thinking in the States, there was that lawsuit that has ordered the FCC to, I guess you could say, show how they determined the exposure limits, and the Canadian limits are essentially the same with minor variations here and there. So maybe some of that will spill off into Canada, where they'll have to, Health Canada and Innovation, Science and Economic Development will have to show why higher limits that they're advocating should be allowed. And especially with the way... Yeah, go ahead.
You're absolutely right. It was a huge win in some ways in the U.S., the Environmental Health Trust and some other groups went to the court, and going through their system, they found that the thousands and thousands of pages of peer-reviewed science that was deposited with the court, the FCC had not so much as taken a look at it. So the court did not rule on the validity or of the science. What they found was that the FCC had not even, cracked the cover of it. And so this is really, really important, because exactly the same thing is happening in Canada. When with C4ST, we looked at the references that were referenced by Health Canada in their scientific report about Safety Code 6. And vast amounts of very important, very strong science was just not even there. It is completely absent. So it's as if they're in some little cone of silence about science. And we have to break that down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
it's
as I
if
mentioned
we have
earlier,
scientific solitudes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that the people involved with electromagnetic radiation have been quite concerned about the health issues, and very valid, but we do have to start focusing more on the foundation science behind the whole subject.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There's a paper that I co-authored that is coming out pretty soon, and it's looking at receptors on nerves and how chemicals interact with. And there are certain nerve receptors, they're called transient protein receptors, that interact with chemicals, and they can be sensitized by chemicals and the end result is multiple chemical sensitivities. Now, the same factors are actually involved with neurological decline, but differently. So that was the topic of this paper. But those same receptors are activated and can be sensitized by radiofrequency radiation. There is some research on that. So people talk about the similarities between the sort of manifestation of chemical sensitivities and electrosensitivities. The two can interact. If you've got one, you're more likely to develop the other. And now we see that in these receptors, there is the communism. As far as the mechanism for biological changes with radiofrequency radiation, back in the 70s, when I was at University of Toronto, I had the honor of being a summer student. And being a summer student in research is fantastic. I loved it. And there was somebody who was just in our lab for a few days, and he was talking about how they used microwave radiation to make chemical reactions go faster. Now, usually chemists or cooks, what they do is take the, they put all their reactants in a vessel, and then they heat it up to produce a different chemical. The best, chemist in your family, my chemistry teacher said, is probably your mom, because she cooks, and that's what chemistry is about, And so now, we have a lot of microwave ovens in our kitchens, and people do know that things cook differently in the microwave than they do on the top of the stove or in the oven. But to go back to this speeding up of cooking in chemical reactions, much more specifically, they were using microwave radiation to catalyze chemical reactions. Now, if you catalyze something, you make it happen faster, and you make it happen with lower energy input. So from a chemical engineering point of view, this is great, because you don't need as much energy to produce your product. And that this is something which now there are thousands of chemical reactions that are documented as being successful using microwave catalysis. So microwave catalysis is something that chemists know about. So what happens to your body? Because your body has at the same time millions of chemical reactions going on. You know, I open my eyes, I close my eyes. There's a whole bunch of chemical reactions just for that. And so if we are exposed to microwave radiation, some of these chemical reactions are more affected than others. And so just on a very general level, what we're doing is we're putting this disconnect. We're kind of scrambling the orderly chemical reactions that would be part of your normal biochemistry. So that's on a very, kind of very basic, airy-fairy kind of level. But we know also that these, a lot of these chemical reactions happen in membranes. So these enzymes are sort of immobilized somewhat so that they can happen in order. And when we go back to the microwave catalysis experiments, we find out that if you have little blobs of fatty stuff in your mixture, and your reactants are somewhat immobilized, that the microwave catalysis works better. So in the very simplistic systems, we're seeing that something that resembles a membrane actually is more responsive to microwave catalysis. So this model fits in with other types of biochemical models that people talk about. People talk about how transport through membranes of ions such as calcium. That fits with the model of microwave catalysis, for instance. So a lot of the observations also fit with this fundamental idea that low levels of microwave radiation change reaction rates in your basic biochemistry. And that's a mechanism that could explain what we're seeing. It's a mechanism we know absolutely exists. People use it commercially. There's a test to look at immunoglobulins. It's a kind of a sophisticated test. And what you do is you take a bit of blood and you mix it up. And then if you simply heat it to make the reactions occur, it takes 8 hours. If you use a little bit of microwave radiation, you can do it in 4 minutes. This is being used commercial. This is being used for biochemistry, in practice. So we've got something which we have, explained in terms of science for thousands of chemicals. We have something that's used biochemically, explains what we're seeing, and so I think that really we've got to stop trying to look for and explain away what we're actually seeing and simply say, no, we've got to do better. There's other ways to achieve our ends. And let's, try to really cut down on this microwave radiation model and transmit our signals some other way, which would be more contained. And it also, as I said, it's lower energy. It's got a lot of other features that are very, very good. In terms of the resilience, I live in Dunrobin, which is outskirts of Ottawa. And for years, Dunrobin has annual disasters. We had a flood, a huge flood. Then there was a tornado. And then there was another flood. And then we shared the disaster with the entire globe, and we have a pandemic. But during the tornado, my daughter actually in that tornado. She was okay. Yeah. But I was away at the time, and she the newspaper was there and they took a picture of her, and she thought, oh my goodness, if the first thing mom sees about this is me, beside my destroyer. And so I was actually away, and I got a phone call from my house. Oh, that's really weird. Who the heck is at my house? Because I live alone. The dog's not here.
Yeah.
And so it was my daughter, because there was no cell phone service. The thing that still worked was the wired phone service. So at that point I said, I don't want to get rid of these wires because they are still working. And all of these towers and everything, they go up in smoke. They are blown away. If we want security of telecommunications, which is really, really important, then we're going to, use the established model that's not super high tech.
Yeah, this is a lot more stable. I don't know about in Ontario where you are, but I know here TELUS is doing their best to get people off of the wired lines, and there
I've
will
heard
be.
that.
Yeah, and I suspect that's sort of a move internationally that they want to get rid of the wired lines, and it concerns
Copper's
me.
pretty expensive. Yeah.
Well, they've already put the copper in. I mean, it's on a long-term cost now. I don't think it does add much to have the copper, and it's probably a lower maintenance cost. It's probably cheaper in the long run to have copper lines, but for some reason we have to have wireless everywhere. As you mentioned to me earlier, that you really don't need wireless to tell you that you're getting low on eggs in your fridge. You can probably figure that out all on
this
yourself.
Internet of the Things.
Yeah,
I think, so do we need Internet of Things because we can't think anymore? Like, really? Some of the crazy things they have. There's a wireless diaper, evidently. Can you imagine your baby's genitals? And it's supposed to send a signal to your telephone so that when your baby has done something in their diaper. For crying out loud. Like, that is ridiculous.
What about looking after your kid on your own? I bet you figured that out on your own when your daughter.
Yeah. That's right. I don't know. There's people have really gone completely over the top. It's very, very silly. And in this day and age, I think we've got to really refocus and concentrate on what we need and not put resources into just real stuff that's harmful.
Well, I was just thinking that with wireless, it's almost like they've got a new toy that they have to find out how many ways they can play with it, which may be great for a science investigative point of view, but it's not a way to carry forward on our life to try to do everything that way.
Oh, yeah.
But I was just thinking that maybe we should, when your next paper comes out, that sounds like a good interview topic, that maybe we should close things for now and bring you back on for that interview and talk about the paper and how that affects things.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Yes, it's been accepted. So any day now, we're really excited to be able to bring that out and share it with everybody.
Yeah, I look forward to that paper.
Okay. Well, thank you ever so much for this opportunity. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've enjoyed it, even though I did have to get up early in the morning to do it, but it was worth it.
We can do it other times.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it was well worth it getting up to do the interview.
Oh, that's sweet of you.
Yeah. Okay. And I'd like to thank everyone for watching this extended version of Citizens Forum and invite you back when we have our next interview.
Yep. And good luck with the election. Get out there and talk to your candidates, because we really got to have, this is a very important time for the world with climate change, and we need to have science first.
Yeah, it's very important. I keep wondering where things are going to be going. But we'll find out.
The future ain't over yet.
Yeah, that's got one point. Okay. Oh,
We'll
thanks
talk
very
again
much.
soon.
Okay.